Hello everyone, and welcome to From My RPG Library. Hey everybody, this is Patrick, your host for From My RPG Library. This is the show where I grab a book out of my RPG library and give you my thoughts on it. Always remember, I am not a reviewer. In this week's show, we are looking at the second book in the Giovanni Chronicles, Blood and Fire. This is another Black Dog Gaming Factory book, which was White Wolf's gaming line intended for mature audiences, and believe me, with this one, they absolutely meant it. Blood and Fire definitely pushed the envelope in what I've read and what I had read or am reading currently in RPGs. But before we get into that, let's take a look at some of the nuts and bolts. This book is written by Richard Dansky, Cynthia Summers, and Christopher Howard. Art was done by Jason Brubaker, Dennis Calero, Richard Clark, James Daly, Fred Harper, Eric Hotz, Leif Jones, Larry McDougall, Andrew Ritchie, Andrew Robinson, Alex Shaman, and E. Allen Smith. That is a lot of artists. It was originally published on April 1st, 1996. This story takes place in 1666 and is a continuation of The Last Supper, the first book in the Giovanni Chronicles. Keep in mind, there's no need to have played through The Last Supper, although there are rewards for those players continuing through the journey. Much like the first book, this story is played out over 3 acts. The setting for this book include Rome, Switzerland, and London. So let's talk about the 3 things that I really enjoyed about this book. First off was continuity of story. This was especially nice having just wrapped up Last Supper and moving into this book. It made it a lot easier for my players to make that transition. There is a 222-year time difference between the 2 books. Although the characters are powerful vampires in their own right, they're 7th generation to be exact, they can still feel the manipulation of the elders. So the second thing I really enjoyed about this book was the flow. Where The Last Supper was very much a railroaded story, this one was a lot more open, a lot more fluid. Don't be fooled. And I say that because although the characters are allowed to make a lot more choices than they were in The Last Supper, there's definitely some things that they need to accomplish in order for the story to progress. So at some point you may have to slip them on a railroad track to get them moving in the right direction. So just keep that in mind. I did my best not to push them, but definitely throw out enough carrots to try to keep them going the way I needed them to go. They, of course, made their own choices and went a couple different directions that I wasn't expecting, but that's okay. We were able to recover. The third thing I really enjoyed about this book, it's actually going to be something I didn't enjoy about the book too, so just bear with me on this one, is the live action pullouts. As they did in Last Supper, this book has areas where they give hints and tips on how to portray the scene in a live action format or LARP format. It's really cool. I would imagine that this would be an amazing LARP storyline, and perhaps one of these days, if I ever get into LARP again, I would run it. Perhaps there's other things that go along with it. Those are the 3 things that I really enjoyed about the book. Let's take a look at some of the things that I didn't enjoy about the book. Number 1, pushing the envelope. As I stated earlier, this is a Black Dog Gaming Factory book. This means it is intended for a mature audience, and they meant it with this book, that's for sure. You have to understand, I'm typically one that's all for pushing the envelope on some things. I don't mind stretching the limit, making my players feel uncomfortable, especially in a Vampire the Masquerade game. I like to make them feel uncomfortable to the point where not quite stepping over that line, but at least nudging that line a little bit. This book not only steps over the line, but seems to leap over the line and laugh at their face as they're doing it. There's just a couple things that are in here. Now, I chose to keep these scenes in. I didn't have to. I wanted to see reaction from some of my players. Some of them were kind of disgusted. Others were just a little weird, I guess, and they thought it was kind of funny. So keep that in mind. Read through it. Identify certain areas that you like or don't like that you may think push it too far, and it might be something you choose not to use. The other thing I didn't like about the book was there was a lack of direction when it comes to live action. In Last Supper, it felt like they were trying to push you into running the whole thing as a live action event. There was a lot of live action stuff that they would call out. They would, give great explanation and tips and stuff on how to run it as live action. They didn't do it as much in this one. When they did do it, I thought it was great, and I really enjoyed it. There were some times, though, in fact, when I first started reading this book, that as I was reading through, I thought, did they just give up on the whole Mind's Eye Theater thing here? or are they going to use it somewhere later, or what's going on? And when I did find it, I was like, oh, well, there it is. There's a lot of NPCs and solo scenes that are going to require a lot of extra storytellers, so just remember that would be quite a protection. We'll talk about that later. So for the third thing that I didn't like about this book, I couldn't find anything else. As I've done in a couple other books, I find myself struggling to come up with a third thing that I don't like about the book, which the reason is I really enjoyed it. The first two things that I called out here are the things that I didn't like. I enjoy the story. I enjoy how they continued it from The Last Supper, and I enjoy how they're leaving it off for the third book in the series. So there you go. How would you use this book? Well, obviously, first and foremost, run the story. That's the easiest way to do it. Just run it and run it as a tabletop event. There are a lot of really cool scenes, really great interactions, and really great opportunities to roleplay. You're not going to be rolling a lot of dice. The characters are going to have great opportunities just to roleplay out each scene, which is really different if you're more of a Dungeons and Dragons player, where you're used to rolling dice for all sorts of various checks. I at least choose not to make that happen here. You are able to run this story in succession to The Last Supper, and especially now with these books being so old, you can just pick them all up and run them. So, and there are great rewards for characters that are continuing on. There are also instructions on how to create a character if you haven't played through Last Supper, which is great. Second thing that you can use this book for is just straight lore. White Wolf does a fantastic job of creating these books that mirror, their world of darkness, that mirrors the real world. So historical events, historical locations, things like that you're going to see within these books. They also do a great job as future editions of the game comes out to disregard these books, and sometimes they even reference them, reference events that have happened in these books. So if you read through these books and you're reading some of the newer books and they make these references, you'll understand what they're talking about. Third way to use this, obviously, is run the story as a LARP. There's a huge opportunity to run this as a LARP. I would tone down some of the intensity of the book because it could lead to some very uncomfortable situations, especially if you're not dealing with very mature role players. You're going to need a lot of help. This is not something that a single storyteller can do. You're going to need 4 or 5 storytellers. You're going to need several NPCs because there's so many NPCs within the story. You're going to need multiple people to play those NPCs. So just keep that in mind. It would be a huge production and something you're going to need to take some time to plan out. You're going to need to make sure your NPCs understand their characters and so on and so forth. It could be done, and it could be fantastic. Just keep that in mind. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the second book in the Giovanni Chronicles, Blood and Fire. It is a book I would recommend, as it is rich in Vampire the Masquerade lore and would make an excellent piece to any collection. Do you have an RPG book you want me to look at? Well, you can always hit me up on Twitter at 307RPG, or you can drop me a line at my email address, pcostle@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.